So I'm going to give a response to to my response to comments video. Whoa. Um, this is a little bit of a long comment. It's obviously a comment that someone put a lot of thought into, so I wanted to take the time to respond to it. Normally, if a comment is especially like kind of thought out, there's some thought behind it. I try my best to respond to comments like that, especially. Sometimes it's frustrating because sometimes people know what they're trying to say, but it'll come off kind of rambling. I'm guilty of that sometimes too. What I'm going to do first, I will read the comment in its entirety, kind of quickly first. Then I'll kind of go back and at least hit a couple highlights. I might not respond to it all line for line, but is definitely well thought out. There's some things I think that are wrong here, but I don't say that like disrespectfully, to the commenter. It's just I think that if you think about some of the things that I'm going to say in response to this, um, maybe you'll see some things a little bit differently. So the commenter says, "You said we should imagine the number line in both directions as positive and negative numbers. But negative numbers are only an artificial concept that has no basis in reality. Don't you think you said we can think of God as zero? What I was getting at in the previous comment was, wouldn't it be more appropriate to think of the source as infinity multiplied by a set of infinite variables, attributes like knowledge, power, light, bliss, mind, etc.? All the attributes we know, and zero is also a part of the number line, included as a part of God, infinity being the masculine principle and zero being the feminine in esoteric terms. And then you have the mind of God, aka the demiurge in Gnostic terms, that chooses to multiply a particular quantity from the infinity above to a particular attribute or set of attributes like square, red, three-dimensional, etc., to form formative physical reality that we experience here in the world. By saying God can be represented by just zero is accepting one side of the coin and not the other being pure infinity, since it's only because of the existence of pure infinity that absolutely nothing, no space, etc., nothing, i.e., zero, can exist. The existence of an infinite something means there's no matter, no space, etc., outside of it except it, hence, nothing, zero in the purest sense, also exists aside to him. You know the classic question of why is there something rather than nothing? Well, these guys missed the point. It's actually because an infinite something exists that absolutely nothing also exists, and both are united as one. Also, the other refutation to your point that God can be represented as zero is that zero by itself cannot do anything on its own. It cannot cause movement or determine something or kickstart things into being. There has to be something else. Now, what would the nature of this something else be? It can only be the description I gave in the last comment, since its existence also gives rise to the concept of absolute nothing, i.e., zero. Don't you think this is a more holistic understanding of the matter? Please reply to my comment if you can. I love to hear your take on these topics. First, the way I was reading that without really any inflection, just monotone, robotic, is because there's virtually no punctuation in this. It makes it extremely hard to follow. That in it. So I don't like to get hung up on things like spelling, punctuation, grammar. I like to focus on the comment of, on the substance of a comment. But I will say this to the commenter. Um, it's it's good to be able to organize your thoughts into words, into language, like in written language, especially. Like grammar and punctuation is a very important part of that. Uh, and things like grammar, punctuation, that has to do with like the organizational structure of language. Uh, People could split hairs on this, but that definitely has some relationship to the organization of thought. If your language isn't well organized, in other words, if it doesn't follow the rules of grammar and punctuation, to some extent that kind of shows that your thoughts are disorganized too, to some extent at least, I think, you know. But again, this is a YouTube comment. It's not a term paper. I don't want to be like all hung up on that like some kind of grammar Nazi or something. Let me try to get to like substantive comments the best I can. If it were organized better, maybe I could follow it a little bit better. But I get the general gist of most of it. So they said. So the first thing I want to comment on is early on. Uh, the commenter says, I'm gonna say she, just because from the username it appears to be female. If someone presents as female, I'm sorry if I'm misgendering you here, but I'm just gonna say she. Says that negative numbers are just an artificial concept that has no basis in reality. I don't think that's the case. I think that mathematics is reality, essentially. Um, I don't. I don't. How do I say this? I don't privilege positive numbers over negative numbers. I think it's all real. Positive numbers are real. Negative numbers are real. Imaginary numbers are real. And our reality is made up of mathematics as a whole. Um, it's very easy to point to examples of negative numbers in the world. Um, I mean, a vacuum, it's negative pressure, right? I mean, uh, debt, right? Are you going to say like debt isn't real? Um, I mean, negative numbers are all around us, right? Um, I mean, I think one of the easiest to demonstrate, just like at a physical level, would be something like negative pressure or a vacuum, right? Um, no, I mean, it goes without saying, maybe you, obviously, there's no such thing as a negative two apples or something like that, right? I mean, obviously, but I mean, negative numbers definitely are a part of, the mathematics that governs the universe, right? Clearly. Um, let's see. Some of this is just honestly not well organized, so no offense, it's just a little bit hard to respond to some things. Now, something else I come to a little further down. She makes some comment like infinity is the masculine principle and zero is the feminine principle in esoteric terms. Now, I think generally, whether we're talking about like, Taoism or whatever, typically, anytime there's like polarity and one is associated with masculine, one is feminine, typically the masculine principle is considered positive and the feminine principle is negative. So, I mean, if you're saying the negative doesn't exist in reality, then you're denying the existence of the feminine, essentially. But no, the feminine is not associated with zero, it's associated with the negative. Zero is kind of a point of balance between negative and positive. And let's see. Because so much of this is just run on sentences, it's hard to respond to. Uh, so this is a interesting point, like kind of toward the end. Something about the other refutation to your point that God can be represented as zero is that zero by itself cannot do anything on its own. It cannot cause movement or determine something or kickstart things into being. There has to be something else. Now, what would the nature of this something else be? It can only be the description I gave. Oh, okay. Let me just deal with that. So that actually is an interesting point, and it's something that some of the ancient philosophers like Plato and others kind of dealt with. Some of the classical theologians kind of dealt with stuff like this too. Because classically, one of the attributes associated with like God is immutability, right? He's unchanging, like zero, right? So they had the same kind of idea, like how could an unchanging being be the creator? Right? Because there was a time for eternity past when he didn't create stuff and therefore was not a creator, right? And then at some point he changed from not being a creator to being a creator, and he created everything, right? So that seems to go against the kind of classical theological notion of the immutability of God, right? And that's one of the reasons I think Plato and others kind of came up with the concept of something like a demiurge, not necessarily in the Gnostic kind of sense, but in more the Platonic sense. That this is almost like a lesser deity or something that actually created the universe, rather than being the supreme being or whatever. But I think there's another way of approaching that, and this is the way my thinking sort of goes. What if creation is an eternal action? And what if the attribute of creativity is an eternal and unchanging part of God's nature? That is probably worth reflecting on. I could probably devote an entire video to that. Just from what I've said, you either get that or you don't. If you don't, it would probably take a whole lot of talking to get the point across. But what if creativity is an eternal attribute of divinity? And what if creation is an eternal act that never began and never ends? I think that would be another way of solving the problem. And that might be the best way of solving the problem, because any kind of appeal to something like a Platonic demiurge, okay, well, where did that demiurge come from? You would still have to say that he was created or emanated by the ultimate God, which is still problematic, because that gets us back to the same problem, because now there's a point where the supreme God or whatever creates or gives birth to the demiurge somehow, and would that not also be a challenge to the immutability of the supreme divinity? You see what I'm saying? So I think my answer is more elegant, and I think it avoids begging the question. You know what I'm saying? So I think that's worth reflecting on. I think I might have the best possible answer there. Um, Now, one other point in the comment, it says something about like 0 and infinity being different sides of the same coin. No, I disagree with that too. Again, in my view, I've said this a lot of times before, but infinity and negative infinity are opposite sides of the same coin. 0 is where the two are united. 0 is neither negative nor positive, right? It is the sum of all negative and positive numbers. I know there's a lot more in the comment. It's just I really can't respond to some of it just because of the organization of the comment. The little things that pop out, I've kind of responded to some of the things that stood out to me as maybe being main points or something like that, or as being I responded to what was interesting to me or where I thought there was like maybe kind of a point being made or something like that. So I'll leave that at that. I appreciate people that put a little thought into comments. So again, I just wanted to take a little time and respond to it the best I could. And this is not an insult. I'm not putting anyone down by saying this, but it's just objectively speaking, this isn't the best organized comment in terms of grammar and punctuation, and that really does make it hard to follow. So it is what it is. But thanks for watching. I'll probably put some more stuff up pretty soon. Peace.